In 1979, Mike Mentzer walked onto the Mr. Olympia stage and shocked everyone who saw him. His physique looked different from anything bodybuilding had seen before. It wasn't just big. It was brutally dense, carved deep into every fiber, with a thickness that seemed compressed under his skin. His chest looked like granite slabs stacked on top of each other. His shoulders had a cannonball roundness that defied the usual soft curves of muscle. His back was so thick it looked like he could pull a truck with it. Every muscle group on his body had a heaviness to it, a grainy quality that made him look more like a sculpture than a man. What made this even more shocking was how he claimed he built that physique. While most bodybuilders of the golden era spent hours in the gym every single day, grinding through endless sets and exercises, Mentzer said he did something completely different. He said his training was short, extremely short, and when people heard this, they didn't believe him. How could someone build a body like that with short training? The entire bodybuilding world believed in one rule above all others: more is better. More sets, more exercises, more time in the gym, more days per week. That was the formula everyone followed. But Mentzer rejected all of it. His approach involved extremely intense sets that push his muscles to absolute failure. It involved fewer total sets than anyone else was doing. It meant less time in the gym than his competitors spent warming up, and it required long recovery periods that seemed insane to bodybuilders who trained twice a day. His methods clashed with everything the sport believed in. People either loved him for challenging the status quo or thought he was completely crazy for throwing away proven methods. His training philosophy became one of the most controversial topics in bodybuilding history, and it still is today. This is a story of how Mike Mentzer's short training built one of the most shocking physiques bodybuilding has ever seen, and why his methods still make people argue decades later. The body that made people pay attention. When Mike Mentzer stepped on stage at his peak in the late 1970s and early 1980s, judges and fans couldn't look away. His chest was ultra-dense, with striations cutting through it like deep canyons. His delts were thick and round, sitting on his shoulders like bowling balls. His arms measured over 18 inches, but looked even bigger because of how compact and hard they were. His back had a depth to it that most bodybuilders couldn't achieve even with years of high-volume training. His legs were dramatic and carved, with sweep and separation that looked like they'd been chiseled by a sculptor. At the Mr. America contest, people noticed him immediately. At the Mr. Universe, he dominated. And at the 1979 Mr. Olympia, he won the heavyweight class with a perfect score. That almost never happened. A perfect score meant every single judge agreed he was the best in his class, with no debate, no close calls, no controversy. His physique that night is still considered one of the top 5 best bodies ever presented at that competition. This wasn't just another golden era body. The golden era produced plenty of incredible physiques, but most of them had a certain aesthetic smoothness to them, a flowing quality that emphasized symmetry and proportion. Mentzer's body had something different. It had weight. It had density. It looked like every muscle fiber was packed tighter than it should be, like his skin was barely containing the thickness underneath. When he flexed, his muscles didn't just pop out. They looked like they hardened into stone. And this is where the first clue about his short training appeared. Mentzer believed that most bodybuilders were doing far too much volume. He thought they were wasting time and energy on redundant sets that added nothing to their growth. He started trimming down his training sessions compared to his peers, cutting out exercises he felt were unnecessary. He wasn't doing this to save time or because he was lazy. He was doing it because he believed more sets didn't mean more growth. In fact, he thought excessive volume was actively holding bodybuilders back from reaching their full potential. The old school volume world he rebelled against. To understand how radical Mentzer's ideas were, you need to understand what bodybuilding training looked like in the 1960s and 1970s. The standard approach was built on volume. Massive, exhausting, never-ending volume. Bodybuilders trained twice a day, doing 20 to 30 sets per body part in each session. A single workout could last 2 or 3 hours. They believed that the more work you did, the more muscle you would build. It was a simple equation. Time equals results. If you weren't spending hours in the gym, you weren't serious about bodybuilding. This mentality dominated the sport. Champions trained this way. Magazine articles promoted this way. Everyone accepted it as the only path to building a great physique. If you wanted to be a bodybuilder, you lifted weights for hours every single day, often splitting your sessions into morning and evening workouts to fit in all the volume you needed. Mike Mentzer stepped into this world and immediately questioned it. He looked at the endless sets and asked a simple question: why? Why did bodybuilders need to do 20 sets for chest when maybe 5 hard sets would do the same thing? Why did they need to spend 3 hours in the gym when an intense 45-minute session might stimulate just as much growth? Why was everyone so attached to doing more when they had no proof that more was actually better? He believed that endless sets were unnecessary, exhausting, and actually holding back growth. He thought bodybuilders were confusing effort with effectiveness. They were working hard, yes, but they weren't working smart. They were burning through their recovery capacity with junk volume that added nothing to their physiques. This is where the second layer of his short training concept appeared: high intensity. Mentzer realized that if you pushed a set hard enough, if you took it all the way to muscular failure, where you physically could not complete another rep, you didn't need many sets. 1 or 2 brutally hard sets could do more than 10 easy sets ever could. The key wasn't quantity. The key was pushing your muscles to a level of intensity that forced them to adapt and grow. Most bodybuilders, he argued, never trained that hard. They did a lot of sets, but none of those sets were truly difficult enough to trigger maximum growth. How Mentzer discovered heavy-duty thinking. Mentzer's transformation didn't happen overnight. In his early years, he actually trained like everyone else. He spent hours in the gym doing high-volume routines, following the standard bodybuilding programs from magazines. He did 20 to 30 sets per body part, trained 6 days per week, and put in the same grinding work as his competitors. But during this time, he noticed something. The results didn't match the effort. He was exhausted all the time, his recovery was terrible, and his progress was slower than it should have been given how much work he was putting in. Then he met Arthur Jones, the inventor of the Nautilus machine and the pioneer of high-intensity training. Jones had a radical philosophy that went completely against mainstream bodybuilding. He believed that 1 set carried to failure was enough if you truly gave everything you had. He argued that muscles grow from stimulation, not annihilation. He emphasized that recovery was just as important as the workout itself, maybe even more important. Mentzer was fascinated. Jones tested him in brutal circuits using Nautilus machines, pushing him through workouts that were short but incredibly intense. Mentzer discovered that he could tolerate extreme intensity better than most people, and that these short, brutal sessions left him feeling more stimulated than hours of traditional volume training ever did. He started experimenting. He reduced his sets and focused on heavier loads. He slowed down his reps, using 4 seconds to lift and 4 seconds to lower, making every repetition harder and more controlled. He pushed every set to true failure, the point where his muscles could not physically move the weight another inch. And he paid close attention to how his body responded. What he found shocked him. He was recovering better. His strength was increasing faster. His muscles were growing despite doing far less total work. This is where the third layer of his short training idea crystallized. A very small number of brutally hard sets could stimulate maximum growth, and everything beyond that was just wearing the body down, delaying recovery, and preventing the next workout from being as intense as it should be. He began calling his approach heavy duty. It meant fewer sets, shorter workouts, but every single set performed with shocking intensity and total effort. There were no warm-up sets that didn't count. There were no easy sets. Every set had a purpose, and that purpose was to push his muscles to the absolute limit of what they could handle. What his workouts actually looked like. So what did Mike Mentzer actually do in the gym? His sessions were short by any standard, often lasting only 30 to 45 minutes from start to finish. But those 30 to 45 minutes were more intense than most bodybuilders' entire 3-hour sessions. He used very few working sets per muscle group, often just 1 to 3 true work sets, and every single one of those sets was taken complete muscular failure. He relied heavily on a technique called pre-exhaustion. This meant doing an isolation movement, immediately followed by a compound movement for the same muscle group. For chest, he might do dumbbell flies to completely exhaust the pecs, then immediately move into a heavy incline press. By the time he got to press, his chest was already fatigued, which meant it would fail before his triceps or shoulders did. This ensured that his chest got maximum stimulation without needing endless sets. For back, he used a similar approach. He might start with a pullover on a machine to isolate his lats, then immediately hit heavy rows or pull-downs. The pullover pre-exhausted his back muscles, making the compound movement far more effective for targeting that specific area. For legs, he might do leg extensions to burn out his quads, then move directly into heavy squats or leg presses. The quads were already screaming by the time he started the compound movement, which meant they reached failure faster and more completely. His shoulder and arm training followed the same principles. Just a handful of extremely intense sets. Each one pushed to complete failure, often with added techniques to make them even harder. He used force reps, where a spotter helped him complete a few extra reps after he couldn't lift the weight on his own. He used negative reps, where he slowly lowered a weight he couldn't lift, taking advantage of the fact that muscles are stronger in the lowering phase. He used rest pause, where he'd do one all-out rep, rest for a few seconds, then do another all-out rep, squeezing every last bit of effort out of his muscles. He even used static holds, where he'd hold a weight in a fixed position after reaching failure, forcing his muscles to keep working even when they couldn't move anymore. These workouts were short in the number of sets, but they felt impossibly long in terms of how hard each set was. There were no easy sets. There was no coasting. Every single rep was controlled, deliberate, and pushed to the limit. Most bodybuilders couldn't mentally handle this level of intensity, which is why they preferred doing more sets at a lower intensity level. It was easier to do 20 moderate sets than it was to do 3 sets that truly push you to failure. This revealed the fourth layer of Mentzer's short training philosophy. He believed that intensity multiplied by recovery time mattered more than total weekly volume. If you trained with extreme intensity, you needed more recovery time to allow your body to rebuild and grow. If you kept hammering your muscles with high volume and frequent training, you never gave them a chance to actually adapt to the stimulus. You were just breaking them down over and over again without letting them grow. He cut out junk volume and focused entirely on all-out efforts, then stepped back and let his body recover. Less frequency, more recovery. The deeper side of Mentzer's short approach had to do with training frequency, and this is where his philosophy became even more controversial. He believed that muscles grew during rest, not during training. Training was just a stimulus that triggered growth, but the actual growth happened when you were away from the gym, eating, sleeping, and recovering. If you trained too often, you interrupted that recovery process before it was complete. You never gave your body a chance to finish building new muscle tissue. Over time, Mentzer didn't just reduce his sets, he reduced his training frequency. While most bodybuilders train 5 or 6 days per week, sometimes twice a day, Mentzer started training only 3 or 4 days per week. Later, he reduced it even further to 2 or 3 days per week. Eventually, in his most evolved version of heavy duty, he recommended training each muscle group only once every several days, sometimes as long as once every 7 to 10 days. This was insane to most bodybuilders. They believed you had to hit each muscle group multiple times per week to keep it growing. They thought that if you only trained a muscle once every week or longer, it would shrink or stagnate. But Mentzer argued the opposite. He said that by training less frequently, you gave your body the time it needed to fully recover, fully rebuild, and come back even stronger for the next workout. If you trained before you were fully recovered, you were just grinding yourself down, not building yourself up. His physique proved the point. His density and thickness suggested that this lower volume, higher recovery approach worked extremely well for him. He wasn't losing muscle by training less often. He was gaining muscle, and he was building a quality of muscle that most bodybuilders couldn't achieve even with their endless hours in the gym. So the short in his training wasn't just about session length. It was about short routines, a short number of sets, fewer total weekly sessions, but all of it performed with very high intensity. He replaced quantity with quality, and he let his body recover enough to actually benefit from the work he was doing. Backlash, controversy, and why bodybuilders resisted. In fact, most of the bodybuilding community rejected them outright. They were too attached to high-volume training, too invested in the belief that more work meant more results. Some felt his theories sounded too extreme, too all or nothing, too different from what generations of bodybuilders had done successfully. Many argued that his methods wouldn't work for everyone. They said that maybe it worked for Mentzer because he had special genetics, but the average lifter would need more volume to grow. Others accused him of exaggerating the need for low volume, claiming he was just trying to sell his training philosophy as something revolutionary when it was really just an excuse to spend less time in the gym. The resistance was intense. Bodybuilding was a culture built on suffering, on grinding, on putting in hours and hours of work. Mentzer was telling people they didn't need to suffer that much, and it made them uncomfortable. It challenged their identity as bodybuilders. If you could build great muscle with short, infrequent workouts, what did that say about all the hours they'd spent in the gym? Were they wasting their time? But the people who actually tried his methods sometimes reported incredible results. They found that they recovered better. Their strength increased faster. They broke through plateaus they'd been stuck at for months or years. Some lifters discovered that they'd been overtraining for a long time without realizing it, and that cutting back their volume allowed their bodies to finally grow. This made the controversy even more heated. Mentzer's ideas worked for some people, which meant they had merit, but they didn't work for everyone, which gave his critics ammunition. The debate became one of the longest-running arguments in bodybuilding history, and it's still not settled today. People still argue about whether heavy duty is the best approach or a niche method that only works for certain individuals. The mindset behind his short training. To truly understand Mentzer's short training, you need to understand his mindset. He wasn't just a bodybuilder. He was a thinker, a philosopher, someone who approached training like an engineer approaches a problem. He studied psychology, philosophy, and rational thinking. He read Ayn Rand and embraced objectivism, a philosophy that emphasized logic, reason, and rejecting tradition for tradition's sake. He believed that bodybuilding should be efficient, that every set should have a clear reason behind it, and that time in the gym should be productive rather than just long. He looked at the way most bodybuilders trained and saw massive amounts of wasted energy. He thought they were doing redundant sets that added nothing to their growth, just because that's what everyone else did. He believed that many bodybuilders were scared of training truly hard, so they were behind doing more volume instead. It was easier to do 20 moderate sets than to do 3 sets that push you to absolute failure. Volume gave them a psychological safety net. They could tell themselves they worked hard because they spent 3 hours in the gym, even if none of those 3 hours were actually intense enough to trigger maximum growth. Mentzer wanted to strip away that false comfort. He wanted people to face the reality that growth came from intensity, not from time spent. He argued that most bodybuilders didn't know what real intensity felt like because they'd never truly pushed themselves to failure on every single set. They thought they were training hard, but they were really just training long. His mindset was to make training shorter, harder, and smarter. Not easier, not lazier, actually harder, because every set mattered, and every set had to be pushed further than most people were willing to go. That required a level of mental toughness and discipline that most bodybuilders didn't have, which is why so many rejected his methods. It was easier to keep doing what everyone else was doing than to face the brutal reality of true high-intensity training. Heavy duty's impact on bodybuilding. Despite all the controversy, Mike Mentzer's heavy-duty philosophy changed bodybuilding forever. His ideas influenced some of the greatest champions in the sport's history. Dorian Yates, who won 6 Mr. Olympia titles in the 1990s, adopted a modified version of heavy-duty training. Yates used low volume, extremely high intensity, and long recovery periods, and he built one of the most massive, dense physiques bodybuilding has ever seen. He openly credited Mentzer's philosophy as a major influence on his training approach. Modern high-intensity training methods owe their structure to Mentzer's philosophy. HIIT-style programs that focus on brief, intense workouts with long recovery periods are direct descendants of heavy duty. Even lifters who don't fully follow Mentzer's system still adopt pieces of it. They train with lower volume than bodybuilders did in the 1970s. They focus on progressive overload, and tracking their strength increases. They value recovery and understand that growth happens outside the gym, not inside it. Mentzer's short, brutal training remains one of the most debated systems in bodybuilding history. His methods force people to ask uncomfortable questions. Do we really need long workouts if intensity is high enough? Are we training hard or just training long? Are we building muscle or just going through the motions because that's what we think bodybuilding is supposed to look like? These questions still don't have settled answers, and that's why Mentzer's legacy continues. His ideas challenge the foundation of bodybuilding training, and even decades after his peak, people are still arguing about whether he was right. Mike Mentzer shocked bodybuilding not by doing more than everyone else, but by doing less at a much higher intensity. His short training wasn't about laziness or shortcuts. It was about precision, logic, and pushing his muscles harder than most people thought was possible. His approach meant short workouts, sometimes as brief as 30 minutes. It meant very few sets, often just 1 to 3 working sets per muscle group. It meant fewer training days per week, sometimes training each muscle only once every several days. It meant a heavy focus on taking every set to true failure, using forced reps, negatives, rest pause, and pre-exhaustion to maximize intensity. And it meant plenty of recovery time to let his body actually grow from the stimulus he gave it. He proved that you could step on stage looking incredibly dense and powerful without living in the gym all day. His physique at the 1979 Mr. Olympia, with its perfect score in the heavyweight class, showed that short, intense training could build a body that competed with anyone who spent hours grinding through endless volume. His ideas still challenge modern lifters to question whether they're really training hard or just training long, whether they're building muscle or just accumulating fatigue. Mike Mentzer's heavy-duty training, his philosophy of short, intense workouts and high-intensity bodybuilding secrets, represents one of the golden era's most important lessons. You don't need to spend your entire life in the gym to build an incredible physique. You need to train with purpose, with intensity, and with intelligence. You need to understand that muscles grow during recovery, not during training. And you need to be willing to push yourself harder than you ever thought possible on the sets that matter. That's the legacy of Mike Mentzer's short training, and that's why bodybuilders are still talking about it today. His HIIT training methods prove that sometimes less really is more, as long as that less is performed with maximum effort and complete dedication. The question isn't how long you train. The question is how hard you're willing to push when it counts.